keep pace. And that was the impetus for the launch of Labcftc here at the agency last summer. Labcftc was launched out of our Office of General Counsel, and we have a stated mission to facilitate market-enhancing innovation, inform policy, and make sure that as a regulator, we have the regulatory and technological tools and understanding to keep pace with our changing markets. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit and talk about how we actually execute on that mission statement. We essentially have, through Labcftc, 3 primary work streams. The first one is something that we call Guide Point. Now, Guide Point simply means engagement with the broader innovation community. And engagement is actually, and we're reminded frequently of how this is the bread and butter, and it's the underpinning of the Labcftc initiative. We spend a significant amount of time meeting with innovators, whether here in Washington or in other cities across the United States, to hear from them. And when we say innovators, that could be, again, a startup, a tech company, or an established regulated financial institution. Anybody who's using technology to do innovative things in our markets, we're willing to talk to them. And the value proposition is twofold. For us as the regulator, it allows us to learn what's actually coming around the corner so that we can be forward-looking and we can be proactive rather than reactive. And then for those who meet with us, if it's a true startup, they may have questions as to how CFTC jurisdiction may apply to particular activities. So we can help to give a bit of an overview of the regulatory landscape. Others may come in and point out areas in the rules where there's ambiguity, or there may be rules that unintentionally are preventing certain activity that could be market enhancing, and we would want to hear that as well. To date, we've met with well over 200 firms and organizations that have come to talk to us through Labcftc. Again, many of those meetings may take place on an ad hoc basis here in DC, or we go to various cities across the US. We've been to New York many times, Chicago, Boston. Earlier this year, we were in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And just last night, I got back into town with my team. We were in Austin, Texas, meeting with innovators at the University of Texas. And it's really incredible, I would say, how much you can glean over time, certain insights and themes and threads that you get by making yourself accessible and opening a door to actually having these conversations with innovators. Now, there have been certain things that have come out of that engagement and certain actions we've taken to be responsive. One of them is through the publication of primers. So what struck us last year is that we were getting consistent and frequent questions as to how CFTC jurisdiction is implicated in the realm of digital assets or virtual currencies. So rather than just have to have these one-off meetings, we thought it might make some sense to actually provide some educational content to the general public. And we published our first Labcftc primer. The format was simply to say, what is this technology? What is the innovation, and what are some of the use cases? How does it implicate CFTC jurisdiction? And what are some of the challenges and risks that market participants should be aware of? We've utilized that format for the virtual currency primer, and we expect to use these primers in other areas of fintech as well. Another area that we had received feedback is that the regulator can serve as an excellent convening platform for a wide array of stakeholders, whether they be market participants, other regulators, thought leaders, think tanks, organizations that want to focus and learn about what are some of the policy insights we can derive from engaging with fintech. So actually just earlier this month, the CFTC held its first ever FinTech Forward conference right here in this room. We had more than 250 participants attend the conference, including a broad range of international regulators who participated. We actually had a Meet the Regulator zone, which allowed an opportunity for folks attending the conference to actually go spend some time with regulators from various jurisdictions, both domestic and international. The second prong of Labcftc is something that we call CFTC 2.0. And the idea here is, as we identify promising technologies, we want to think about which ones we can incorporate as an agency to be more efficient and effective at our work. Or are there ways for us to help stimulate innovation that can actually improve our markets more broadly? So an example of that is we have authority to host innovation competitions as a way to stimulate ideas that can solve public policy challenges. Earlier this year, we put out a request for public feedback and solicited the public to see, are there substantive topics that people think we should explore through an innovation competition, and we heard a lot of really interesting responses. There's a big focus in the regtech space. People are interested in concepts like robo rulebooks or machine readable and machine executable rulebooks, where you essentially tag rules so that compliance software can actually process those rules and help assist in compliance. So you might learn that certain activities trigger certain requirements within a rulebook. What we'll do from here is likely publish some of our insights from the comment period and hopefully execute on an innovation competition in the first half of next year. The last prong of Labcftc is something that we call digital reg. And again, there's an internal and an external focus here. Internally, we're interested in taking some of the learnings and insights that we're deriving from our engagement and ensuring that we share it broadly across staff and the commission. That's where you get your ultimate multiplier effect. We also use this platform to engage with other domestic and international regulators, and part of that effort is to share best practices. What are we all seeing and learning? What insights are we deriving from various types of regulatory tools that can be applied to fintech innovation? So, in light of these types of relationships, earlier this year I was able to go over to London for the UK Financial Conduct Authority's tech sprint on financial crimes and AML. And just being able to learn and derive some insights from their competitions can help inform some of our efforts. So we look forward to continuing to collaborate, again, domestically and internationally. So with that, I wanted to make sure I'm leaving abundant time to kind of take questions before we kick off our panel. So I'm happy to jump into any of the substantive areas of fintech that I mentioned, or talk a little bit more about the build out of the Labcftc initiative.
Rafael from SEC Brazil. Could you tell us a little bit more about the competition that you have promoted?
Yes, so it's interesting. When early days of Labcftc, and thanks to our colleagues in the Office of General Counsel, we wanted to scope out what authorities do we have to actually engage in a more granular way with some of these technologies. Engagement with innovators is great, but how can we make sure we're actually getting our hands onto the technologies to really better understand them? And then what can we do, again, to kind of stimulate certain activity? So the authority that we found is something called the Science Prize Competition Act, which is a U.S. statute that broadly grants U.S. agencies, and it can be federal regulators or some of our science agencies. It grants broad authority to host open prize competitions. And when I say a prize, it could be a cash prize or a non-cash prize. The purpose has to be to stimulate activity that solves for a public policy challenge. It's not supposed to be something where we already know what the off-the-shelf solution would be. So that intrigued us because we saw that as one of the authorities we have as a regulator to actually engage with the innovation community and really think about where can some of these innovations improve what we're doing. We posed a number of ideas that we had. This robo rulebook concept is one that we were interested in. We also wanted to think about how new machine learning tools might assist with certain types of surveillance technologies that could be utilized by enforcement and oversight teams. And then I'll say that one that also struck us as an interesting topic is what can we do in order to better leverage some of the data that we make public. So there's a lot of data that the CFTC publishes. Other federal agencies do the same. But in terms of how digestible is that to the average public, probably not very. We wanted to explore the idea of if we were to combine our public data sets with other public data sets, are there new data visualization tools that could help people make sense of CFTC markets? Maybe be able to better connect how oil